Senate Majority Leader John Thune says he'll be seeking a rules change to get President Trump's nominees approved more quickly as hundreds of positions remain vacant 9 months into this administration. The announcement follows comments Thune made to Dakota Territory's Blake Trolley, hinting action was on the way.
Majority Leader Thune published an article in Breitbart announcing his plan to allow the Senate to batch groups of nominees together for considerations. Currently, without unanimous consent, each nominee requires individual consideration. Thune says his proposal is modeled off a similar 2023 proposal by Democratic Senators Amy Klobuchar and Angus King. In an interview with Dakota Territory News last month, Thune was critical of Democrats over what he said was slowing down the nominations process.
So the Democrats are forcing multiple votes and intervening time periods, and so they're tying the Senate up on nominees that have broad bipartisan support and for whom there is, these are very qualified people.
Thune says there is historical context for the way in which Trump's nominees have been handled.
President Trump is the first president in history, and we went back as far as Herbert Hoover, and that's as far back as data we could find. He's the first president in history not to have a single one of his nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer took to the Senate floor Monday to criticize the potential rules change, Schumer calling President Trump's nominees unprecedentedly bad and saying that the president has made a mockery of the nominations process.
If you don't debate nominees, if you don't vote on individual nominees, if there's not some degree of sunlight, what will stop Donald Trump from nominating even worse individuals than we've seen to date, knowing this chamber will rubber stamp anything he wishes?
As for a key nominee in South Dakota, the president's pick for U.S. Attorney Ronald A. Parsons Jr. is currently awaiting approval by the full Senate, despite being cleared out of the Judiciary Committee on a voice vote. Parsons was one of 10 potential U.S. attorneys who Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley requested unanimous support for. Committee ranking member Dick Durbin objected to the request. Senator Durbin pointed to what he calls obstruction of U.S. attorney picks during the Biden administration by Republicans, including the hold of DOJ candidates by then-Senator J.D. Vance in 2023. Durbin also claims that the Trump administration has taken an illegal approach in several blue states and filled U.S. attorney vacancies with what he calls extreme candidates while making no attempt to consult with Democratic senators. Senators Grassley and Durbin are negotiating a path forward for the potential U.S. attorneys to be confirmed. In Rapid City, Blake Trolley, Dakota Territory News.